Hi, my name is Ryan and I'm a lawyer based in Singapore. 1 year ago, I took the New York Bar exam and thankfully passed it on my first attempt. Since then, I've had friends and some contacts on social media ask me about the exam, how I prepared for it, and if there were any strategies that I would recommend. So I wanted to do this video to talk about my overall approach to exam preparation, as well as some of the strategies and tips that I would recommend for each individual component of the New York Bar exam. If you're someone who's thinking about taking the exam, or you've already registered for it and are preparing for the exam now, I hope you find this useful, helpful, and if you have any questions about this, feel free to drop me a message. So let's get started. Now I'll briefly cover the overall format of the New York Bar exam. It consists of 3 components. First, the MBE, or the Multi-State Bar exam, which involves 200 multiple choice questions in 6 hours. Typically, it's done in 2 sittings of 3 hours each, and you have to complete 100 MCQs each time. Second, the MEE, or the Multi-State Essay exam, where you have to finish 6 essays in 3 hours, and this amounts to about writing 1 essay in 30 minutes. And finally, the MPT, the Multi-State Performance Test. In this test, you're given 2 hypothetical tasks as if you're a first-year associate and given these assignments by a senior partner. You would have never seen any of these facts or laws before because they're all fictitious and based on hypothetical scenarios, but in that moment you've got to apply yourself and complete all the tasks that have been given to you. I'll cover each component of the New York Bar exam in separate videos, and you'll be able to find these video links in the show notes below. As a starting point, I highly recommend you regularly visit the New York Bar website, the official NYBE website, for any updates or changes to the exam format and structure, as these things do get updated from time to time. In this video, I will be focusing more on the overall approach and exam strategies that worked for me. Now, I designed the overall strategy for my exam preparation in 2 phases. The first phase was about content mastery and getting very familiar with all the volume that I was about to cover. Second, the next phase leading up to the exam day itself was for me to get as comfortable as I could with the exam conditions and the actual experience of taking the New York Bar exam over those 2 days, which is an incredibly intense period for most who have taken the exam. So the first phase of my preparation was content mastery. And here it's very important to know that you need to internalize all the material that you're going to cover. And equally importantly, how you're going to be tested on exam day. So I would divide my exam preparation for this phase of my strategy in 2 parts. First, the theory, and second, the application. So what does this mean? So in terms of the theory, you need to know that you're going to be faced with more than 10 different subjects during the course of your preparation for the New York Bar. And in my case, I graduated from law school more than 5 years before I took the New York Bar. So I did my law school in the UK, in the University of Cambridge. So I was very familiar with English law, but I hadn't done any kind of law exam for 5 to 6 years before I took this exam. So I was out of touch, and I knew that personally I would have to cater a lot more time in my preparation to make time to master the content. And all of these aspects and issues were new to me, as I had no prior experience with American or New York law. So if you're in a similar situation, you're a foreign student or a foreign lawyer trying to get admitted into the New York State Bar from abroad, you should take this into consideration when you're planning the kind of time you want to put aside to master the content. Which brings me to the next point, which is application. What really helped me in this process was to start with the end in mind, so to speak. Know how you're going to be tested on exam day. And for the New York Bar exam, what I realized is it was very much focused on the issues of the different aspects of law. It wasn't so much about the different unique points of a case or different concepts that different academics may have put forth in terms of the different arguments surrounding each body of law that you were going to cover. Instead, it was very much focused on the practical aspects, because I think the New York Bar exam is one that assesses and prepares each candidate as best as possible to start practicing as an attorney. So in the multiple choice questions, each question and all the facts involved would be challenging that candidate to identify that particular issue of law that was most critical to the exam question and most relevant to the facts at hand, and that would put you in the best position to pick the right answer. And the same thing for the essays, where all of the essays were hypotheticals and you had to identify each issue for each paragraph and how the facts could shape the answer and analysis that you provided by applying all the theory to the facts. I will go through each of the different exam components in separate videos, but I thought I'd just mention them here to give you a better sense of why it's important, based on my recommendation, to start with the application and marry it to the theory in the first part of your preparation. Because otherwise you'd just be going through all the textbooks and reading through all the different bodies of law in a very passive way and not knowing how you were going to be tested on them later on. So to recap, for content mastery, work on the theory and application at the same time. The best way to really digest and internalize all the volume and all the content you're going to be faced with is to know very well how they're going to be tested and what's going to be expected of you on exam day. And if you get very familiar with the way you're going to be tested, the way the exam questions are structured, the kind of essays that you're going to have to write, this will put you in a much better position when you're approaching all of this content. Because it's very easy to get intimidated at the start. When I thought about the prospect of having to cover more than 10 different subjects in a completely new domain of law, it was quite frightening. But having this approach and taking a step back to make sure I planned early and gave myself enough time to cover what I needed to cover really helped me in my exam preparation process. So next, let's cover the second phase of my exam preparation strategy, which is to really focus and zero in on exam day. For me, this was the entire month leading up to the 2 days of the New York Bar exam. The focus and the objective here is to get used to get comfortable and very familiar with all the conditions associated with the day that you're actually taking the exam. Personally, I used to play competitive basketball in high school, and I've learned many lessons from being a student athlete that I carry on with me today. In this case, it's about designing training sessions, practice sessions where you simulate the exam taking conditions that will help you with game day later on. So what I'd encourage you to consider doing is to have a progressive plan. Eventually, you know that the New York Bar exam is a closed book one, and over the course of 2 days, you're going to be stretched mentally, physically, and psychologically, because all of that content, that huge amount of material that we talked about earlier, is going to be channeled into being applied over the course of those 2 days. Essays, multiple choice questions, hypotheticals, and in that condition of intense stress and high pressure, you don't want to be facing those conditions for the first time. So I think you do yourself a huge favor and put yourself in a much better position to do well for the exam by taking the time to create practice sessions, to create mini exam days for yourself leading up to the exam. And do this in a progressive way. You don't have to start in your very first session trying to do 200 questions in 6 hours and without any reference to any material. No, instead, start small. When you're designing these practice sessions, do a smaller number of questions with a bit more time. Refer to your resources and textbooks if you need to at the start. And increasingly, as you get more and more familiar with the content and you get more comfortable with taking exams under that kind of condition, you'll know better how much time you have to cater, for example, to planning an essay and how much you usually need to write it out. And with all of these different metrics and considerations in mind, start to then implement fixed days for yourself where you time yourself and adhere to the same exam conditions that you're going to be facing on exam day. So what this does for you is it allows you to be in a position where when you're taking the real exam, you're not going to be thinking about worrying about time because you're already going to know how much time you need to allocate for each question. You're not going to be worried about how much time you cater to preparation, to drafting a skeletal answer. No, you've done all of that in your preparation. The intensity of the New York Bar exam demands every ounce of your sharpness and your focus on exam day itself. So this whole second phase of preparing for exam day is to take all the different factors and variables that you can control, that you can determine, and that you can prepare for out of the equation, so that on exam day, you only have to focus on the questions at hand and how to best apply everything you've learned to everything that you see in front of you. To recap, start with the end in mind, be very familiar with how you're going to be tested on exam day, and plan practice sessions that mimic and replicate all the exam conditions so that you'll be as comfortable as you can on the day itself. So in this video, we've talked about the overall approach that I took that really helped me in my preparation for the New York Bar exam. First, start by catering time to master the content, focus on the material that you have, and at the same time, start to understand how you're going to be tested and how this is going to be applied in the exam later on, because that will allow you to approach the study in an active way. And there's no better way of retaining and internalizing the content that you're doing than through practice questions and putting yourself in the same situation that you're going to have to use the content on when you're taking the exams. And second, in the lead up to the exam, focus on everything related to exam day. Plan and cater enough time for yourself to do practice sessions that are completely identical to what you're going to face on exam day. And you won't be fazed because you've been there, done that. And you've taken all of that additional stress out of the exam day itself so that you can focus completely on each question and answering it as best as you can. Now, in the next few videos, I will be diving into certain tips and strategies tailored to each component of the exam: the multiple choice questions, the essays, and the performance test. I hope you found this helpful, and all the very best in your journey towards passing the New York Bar exam.